Chapter 3, Part 2. Few people who have not seen modern war can understand what it is like. They look at a map, which is a small flat surface, and find it difficult to believe that a body of men could have had difficulty in passing from one point upon it to another. They think that they themselves would have found no difficulty, that they would not have been weary nor thirsty, the distance demanded of them being only a mile, possibly a mile and a quarter, and the reward a very great one. They think that troops who failed to pass across that mile must have been in some way wanting, and that had they been there, either in command or in the attack, the results would have been different. One can only answer that in modern war it is not easy to carry a well-defended site by direct attack. In modern war you may not know, till fire breaks out upon you, where the defense, which you have to attack, is hidden. You may not know, in darkness in a strange land, more than vaguely which is your front, and you may pass by your enemy, or over him, or under him, without seeing him. You may not see your enemy at all. You may fight for days and never see an enemy. In modern war, troops see no enemy till he attacks them. Then, in most cases, if they are well entrenched with many guns behind them, they can destroy him. The Allied officers, looking through their field glasses at the ground to be attacked, could see only rough, sloping ground, much gullied, much overgrown, with a few clumps of trees, a few walls, orchards and houses, but no guns, no trenches, no enemy. Airplanes scouting over the Turks could see men, but not the trenches nor the guns. They could only report that they suspected them to be in such a place. Sometimes in the mornings men would notice that the earth was turned newly on some bare patch on the hill, but none could be sure that this digging was not a ruse to draw fire. The trenches were hidden cunningly, often with a head cover of planks so strewn with earth and planted with scrub as to be indistinguishable from the ground about. The big guns were colored cunningly, like a bird or snake upon the ground. From above, in an airplane, an observer could not pick them out so as to be certain if they were not in action at the time. Brave men scouting forward at night to reconnoiter brought back some information, but not more than enough to show that the Turks were there in force. No man in the Allied army expected less than a desperate battle. No officer in the world could have made it anything but that, with all the odds against us. Nothing could be done but cover the Turk position with the fire of every gun on shore or in the ships, and then send the men forward, to creep or dash as far as they could, and then dig themselves in. Let the reader imagine himself to be facing 3 miles of any very rough, broken, sloping ground known to him, ground for the most part gorse, thyme, and scrub-covered, being poor soil, but in some places beautiful with flowers, especially a spiked yellow flower with a whitish leaf, and on others green from cultivation. Let him say to himself that he and an army of his friends are about to advance up the slope towards the top, and that as they will be advancing in a line along the whole length of the 3 miles, he will only see the advance of those comparatively near to him, since folds or dips in the ground will hide the others. Let him, before he advances, look earnestly along the line of the hill as it shows up clear in blazing sunlight only a mile from him, to see his tactical objective, one little clump of pines, 300 yards away, across what seemed to be fields. Let him see in the whole length of the hill no single human being, nothing but scrub, earth, a few scattered buildings of the Levantine type, dirty white with roofs of dirty red, and some patches of dark Scotch pine, growing as the pine loves, on bleak crests. Let him imagine himself to be more weary than he has ever been in his life before, and dirtier than he has ever believed it possible to be, and parched with thirst, nervous, wild-eyed, and rather lousy. Let him think that he has not slept for more than a few minutes together for 11 days and nights, and that at all his waking hours he has been fighting for his life, often hand to hand in the dark with a fierce enemy, and that after each fight he has had to dig himself a hole in the ground, often with his hands, and then walk 3 or 4 roadless miles to bring up heavy boxes under fire. Let him think, too, that in all those 11 days he has never for an instant been out of the thunder of cannon, that waking or sleeping, their devastating crash has been blasting the air across within a mile or two, and this from an artillery so terrible that each discharge beats as it were a wedge of shock between the skull bone and the brain. Let him think, too, that never for an instant in all that time has he been free or even partly free from the peril of death in its most sudden and savage forms, and that hourly in all that time he has seen his friends blown to pieces at his side, or dismembered, or drowned, or driven mad, or stabbed, or sniped by some unseen stalker, or bombed in the dark sap with a handful of dynamite in a beef tin, till their blood is caked upon his clothes and thick upon his face, and that he knows, as he stares at the hill, that in a few moments more of that dwindling band, already too few, God knows how many too few, for the task to be done, will be gone the same way, and that he himself may reckon that he is done with life, tasted and spoken and loved his last, and that in a few minutes more may be blasted dead, or lying bleeding in the scrub, with perhaps his face gone and a leg and an arm broken, unable to move but still alive, unable to drive away the flies or screen the ever-dropping rain, in a place where none will find him or be able to help him, a place where he will die and rot and shrivel till nothing is left of him but a few rags and a few remnants and a little identification disc flapping on his bones in the wind. Then let him hear the intermittent crash and rattle of the fire augment suddenly and awfully in a roaring, blasting roll, unspeakable and unthinkable, while the air above, that has long been whining and whistling, becomes filled with a scream of shells passing like great cats of death in the air. Let him see the slope of the hill vanish in a few moments into the white, yellow, and black smokes of great explosions shot with fire, and watch the lines of white puffs marking the hill in streaks where the shrapnel searches a suspected trench. And then, in the height of the tumult, when his brain is shaking in his head, let him pull himself together with his friends and clamber up out of the trench to go forward against an invisible enemy, safe in some unseen trench expecting him. The 29th Division went forward under these conditions on the 6th of May. They dashed on, or crawled, for a few yards at a time, then dropped for a few instants before squirming on again. In such an advance, men do not see the battlefield. They see the world as the rabbit sees it, crouching on the ground, just their own little patch. On broken ground like that, full of dips and rises, men may be able to see nothing but perhaps the ridge of a bank 10 feet ahead, with the dust flying in spouts all along it, as bullets hit it, some 1,000 a minute, and looking back or to their flanks, they may see no one but perhaps a few men of their own platoon, lying tense but expectant, ready for the sign to advance, while the bullets pipe over them in a never-ending bird-like croon. They may be shut off by some all-important foot of ground from seeing how they are fronting, from all knowledge of what the next platoon is doing or suffering. It may be quite certain death to peep over that foot of ground in order to find out, and while they wait for a few instants, shells may burst in their midst and destroy a half of them. Then the rest, nerving themselves, rush up the ridge and fall in a line dead under machine gun fire. The supports come up, creeping over their corpses, get past the ridge, into scrub which some shell has set on fire. Men fall wounded in the fire, and the cartridges in their bandoliers explode and slowly kill them. The survivors crawl through the scrub, half choked, and come out on a field full of flowers, tangled 3 feet high with strong barbed wire. They wait for a while to try to make out where the enemy is. They may see nothing but the slope of the field running up to a skyline and a flash of distant sea on a flank, but no sign of any enemy, only the crash of guns and the pipe and croon and spurt of bullets. Gathering themselves together, their brave men dash out to cut the wire and are killed. Others take their places and are killed. Others step out with too great a pride even to stoop and pull up the supports of the wires and fling them down and fall dead on top of them, having perhaps cleared a couple of yards. Then a couple of machine guns open on the survivors and kill them all in 30 seconds with a concentrated fire of a battalion. The supports come up and hear about the wire from some wounded man who has crawled back through the scrub. They send back word, held up by wire, and in time the message comes to the telephone, which has just been blown to pieces by a shell. Presently, when the telephone is repaired, the message reaches the gunners, who fire high explosive shells onto the wire and onto the slopes where the machine guns may be hidden. Then the supports go on over the flowers and are met midway by a concentrated fire of shells, shrapnel, machine guns, and rifles. Those who are not killed lie down among the flowers and begin to scrape little heaps of earth with their hands to give protection to their heads. In the light sandy marl this does not take long, though many are blown to pieces or hit in the back as they scrape. As before, they cannot see how the rest of the attack is faring, nor even where the other platoons of the battalion are. They lie scraping in the roots of daffodils and lilies, while bullets sing and shriek a foot or two over their heads. A man peering from his place in the flowers may make out that the man next to him, some 3 yards away, is dead, and that the man beyond is praying, the man beyond him cursing, and the man beyond him out of his mind from nerves or thirst. Long hours pass, but the air above them never ceases to cry like a live thing with bullets flying. Men are killed or maimed, and the wounded cry for water. Men get up to give them water and are killed. Shells fall at regular intervals along the field. The waiting men count the seconds between the shells to check the precision of the battery's fire. Some of the bursts fling the blossoms and bulbs of flowers into the bodies of men, where they are found long afterwards by the X-rays. Bursts and roars of fire on either flank tell of some intense moment in other parts of the line. Every feeling of terror and mental anguish and anxiety goes through the mind of each man there and is put down by resolve. The supports come up. They rise with a cheer and get out of the accursed flowers into a gully where some men of their regiment are already lying dead. There is a little wood to their front. They make for that and suddenly come upon a deep and narrow Turk trench full of men. This is their first sight of the enemy. They leap down into the trench and fight hand to hand, kill and are killed, in the long grave already dug. They take the trench, but opening from the trench are saps, which the Turks still hold. Men are shot dead at these saps by Turk sharpshooters cunningly screened within them. Bullets fall in particular places in the trench from snipers hidden in the trees of the wood. The men send back for bombs. Others try to find out where the rest of the battalion lies, or send word that from the noise of the fire there must be a battery of machine guns beyond the wood, if the guns would shell it. Presently, before the bombs come, bombs begin to drop among them from the Turks. Creeping up, the men catch them in their hands before they explode and fling them back so that they burst among the Turks. Some have their hands blown off, others their heads, in doing this. But the bloody game of catch goes on till no Turks are left in the sap, only a few wounded, groaning men who slowly bleed to death there. After long hours, the supports come up and a storm of high explosives searches the little wood, and then, with a cheer, the remnant goes forward out of the trench into the darkness of the pines. Fire opens on them from snipers in the trees and from machine guns everywhere. They drop and die, and the survivors see no enemy, only their friends falling and a place where no living thing can pass. Men find themselves suddenly alone, with all their friends dead, and no enemy in sight, but the rush of bullets filling the air. They go back to the trench, not afraid, but in a kind of maze, and as they take stock and count their strength, there comes the roar of the Turkish war cry, the drum-like proclamation of the faith, and the Turks come at them with the bayonet. Then that lonely remnant of a platoon stands to it with rapid fire, and the machine gun rattles like a motor bicycle, and some ribald or silly song goes up, and the Turks fail to get home, but die or waver and retreat, and are themselves charged as they turn. It is evening now. The day is passed in long hours of deep experience, and the men have made 200 yards. They send back for supports and orders, link up, if they are lucky, with some other part of their battalion, whose adventures, 50 yards away, have been as intense but wholly different, and prepare the Turk trench for the night. Presently word reaches them from some faraway HQ, some dugout 500 yards back in what seems, by comparison, like peaceful England, that there are no supports, and that the orders are to hold the line at all costs and prepare for a fresh advance on the morrow. Darkness falls, and ammunition and water come up, and the stretcher-bearers hunt for the wounded by the groans, while the Turks search the entire field with shell to kill the supports which are not there. Some of the men in the trench creep out to their front and are killed there as they fix a wire entanglement. The survivors make ready for the Turk attack, certain soon to come. There is no thought of sleep. It is too cold for sleep. The men shiver as they stare into the night. They take the coats of the dead and try to get a little warmth. There is no moon, and the rain begins. The marl at the bottom of the trench is soon a sticky mud, and the one dry patch is continually being sniped. A few exhausted ones fall not into sleep, but into nervous dreams, full of twitches and cries, like dogs' nightmares. And away at sea, some ship opens with her great guns at an unseen target up the hill. The terrific crashes shake the air. Someone sees a movement in the grass and fires. Others start up and fire. The whole irregular line starts up and fires. The machine guns rattle. The officers curse. And the guns behind, expecting an attack, send shells into the woods. Then slowly the fire drops and dies, and stray Turks, creeping up, fling bombs into the trench. This kind of fighting between isolated bodies of men advancing in a great concerted tactical movement stretching right across the peninsula went on throughout the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th of May, and ended on the evening of the 8th in a terrific onslaught of the whole line, covered by a great artillery. The final stage of the battle was a sight of stirring and awful beauty. The Allied line went forward steadily behind the moving barrier of the explosions of their shells. Every gun on both sides opened and maintained a fire dreadful to hear and see. Our men were fighting for a little patch of ground vital not so much to the success of the undertaking, the clearing of the Narrows, as to their existence on the peninsula. In such a battle, each platoon, each section, each private soldier influences the result, and pays as current coin in that red purchase as the brigadier. The working parties on the beaches left their work, it is said, to watch and cheer that last advance. It was a day of the unmatchable clear Aegean spring. Samothrace and Euboea were stretched out in the sunset like giants watching the chess, waiting, it seemed, almost like human things, as they had waited for the fall of Troy and the balefires of Agamemnon. Those watchers saw the dotted order of our advance stretching across the peninsula, moving slowly forward and halting and withering away among fields of flowers of spring and the young corn that would never come to harvest. They saw the hump of Achi Baba flicker and burn and roll up to heaven in a swath of blackness, and multitudinous brightness changing the face of the earth, and the dots of our line still coming, still moving forward, and halting and withering away, but still moving up among the flashes in the darkness, more men, and yet more men, from the fields of sacred France, from the darkness of Senegal, from sheep runs at the ends of the earth, from blue gum forests and sunny islands, places of horses and good fellows, from Irish pastures and glens, and from many a Scotch and English city and village and quiet farm. They went on, and they went on, up ridges blazing with explosion into the darkness of death. Sometimes, as the light failed, and peak after peak that had been burning against the sky grew rigid as the color faded. The darkness of the great blasts hid sections of the line, but when the darkness cleared, they were still there. Line after line of dots, still more, still moving forward and halting and withering away, and others coming and halting and withering away, and others following as though those lines were not flesh and blood and breaking nerve, but some tide of the sea coming in waves that fell yet advanced, that broke a little further and gained some yard and breaking, and were then followed and slowly grew, that halted and seemed to wither, and then gathered and went on, till night covered those moving dots, and the great slope was nothing but a blackness spangled with the flashes of awful fire. What can be said of that advance? The French were on the right, the 29th Division on the left, some Australians and New Zealanders brought down from Anzac in support. It was their 13th day of continual battle, and who will ever write the story of even 1/2 hour of that 13th day? Who will ever know 1/100th part of the deeds of heroism done in them by platoons and sections and private soldiers who offered their lives without a thought to help some other part of the line, who went out to cut wire or brought up water and ammunition, or cheered on some bleeding remnant of a regiment halting on that hill of death, and kept their faces to the shrapnel and the never-ceasing pelt of bullets as long as they had strength to go and light to see. They brought the line forward from 1/4 of a mile to 600 yards further into the peninsula. They dug in after dark on the line they had won, and for the next 36 hours they stood to arms to beat back the charges of the Turks, who felt themselves threatened at the heart. Our army had won their hold upon the peninsula. On the body of a dead Turk officer was a letter written the night before to his wife, a tender letter filled mostly with personal matters. In it was the phrase, "These British are the finest fighters in the world. We have chosen the wrong friends." End section 6.